Thank you, Reverend Linda, and everyone else joining us this evening. I'm going to jump right into our conversation. We are joined this evening with 9 of our Common Table leaders, which is a subset of our wider Common Table network. And I'm going to introduce them here briefly before diving into our central question for this gathering. In alphabetical order, we are joined by Pastor J.W. Matt Hennessy of the First Vancouver Avenue Baptist Church and co-chair of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. Reverend Linda Jaramillo, co-chair of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon and member of Ainsworth United Church of Christ. Rabbi David Kosak of Congregation Neve Shalom. MANIJEH MEHRNOOSH of Unite Oregon. Pastor Rick McKinley of the Imago Day community. GURPREET SINGH of the Sikh Center of Oregon. Reverend YUKI SUGAHARA of the Oregon Buddhist Temple. Reverend Tara Wilkins of Bridgeport United Church of Christ, and Randy Woodley of the Eloheh Indigenous Center for Earth Justice. Friends, here we are around Zoom. We're not at a retreat center or someone's church or temple, and we are recording this not long after the presidential election is over. And everyone viewing this tonight knows the broader context behind this conversation. People of the United States seem to be united only in their deep fear that democracy is about to get dismantled by corrupt and amoral actors. And if you're on the left, you perceive that as being from people on the right. And if you're on the right, you might perceive that from being from people on the left. And more, as we all know, there is a growing threat of violence underneath all of these divisions. So with that in our mind, my question is very straightforward. In an era of unprecedented division, can we create a just peace and real unity? And as a follow-up to that, what do our faith and wisdom traditions, which each of us represent, what do those traditions have to offer this process, especially given that so many of the things that divide us are often framed as religious issues? So I'll give you a moment to think about that, and if anyone wants to dive in, let's talk. What a respectful group of people. Everyone waiting for someone else to start us out.
I'll take a swing, more because I just don't like awkward silence. I don't even know if I have anything to contribute, but I was uncomfortable. So, I think out of all faith traditions, value love of a neighbor. In the Christian tradition that I'm from, Jesus teaches us that our enemies actually are our neighbors. Like, we are to love our enemies as we love ourselves. And so in a world that is so polarized by our silos, I think one of the major problems that we have is we don't know each other. We don't want to know each other. And we really never leave the echo chambers of our viewpoints or of our opinions. And one of the beautiful things that faith communities bring to the table, I think, is that idea of loving your neighbor, whether they're across the street, across the city, across the border. And part of loving, I think, is knowing. And these quote unquote, evil people from the other side, whatever side you're on, actually become people with names and stories and not simply data points. And I guess my question off of that question is really, why or how can the people of faith begin to risk those crossings in order to begin to start dialogue, friendship, hospitality with people that don't think, look, or act or vote like we do.
Thanks so much for that, Rick. Yeah. Anyone want to follow up on that?
I can jump in. For me, it's not an issue of resolving these complex problems we have today by not wanting to be in conversation with someone who is different from me. For me, the issue is the challenge of being in conversation with someone who denies my humanity, or someone who actively works against my ability to have equal rights and protections. And they who are claiming that in the name of a God that sounds similar to the God that I follow and the Jesus that I try to emulate. And so it's really difficult to face, regardless of what my posture is or my demeanor, that kind of anger and hatred, to try to then work together on solving issues that really are going to take all of us. And so my concern about sort of the rhetoric of the day, of this moment, is this call for unity, when that unity is with people who are actively racist, with people that are actively homophobic, that people who advocate that I don't have control of my own body. And so finding that way to be in conversation is not as simple as just, I'm going to talk to somebody with a different skin tone, or that is part of a different religious practice, or that was born in a different country. I think this is the work of our time, and I think that we as religious leaders have to try to figure out how to model something else, how to be in conversation. But I'm not willing to settle for a false sense of unity when our Black, Brown, and Indigenous people are being killed by the state, sanctioned by the state. I'm not willing to settle for a false sense of unity that allows our gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people to be victims of hate crimes. That we cannot fall into that unity, because that's actually not really unity.
Thank you. You're breaking up at the end there, but we got, I'd say 98% of that, and so that's great. Thank you so much, Reverend Tara. I appreciate it.
I would like to add something. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Okay. Tara had recently posted something on Facebook, which broke down the percentage of people of different denominations, you could say, who voted for President Trump and also the Republican ticket. So I did a lot of reading online to see where's that support coming from. And as you framed the question, you said, most of these things that divide us are framed as religious issues. And I read on Washington Post a thorough interview, a very substantial interview with different people from the Evangelical Society. And what I came away with was that policy is character. That was the bottom line. So there's a huge percentage of people in the United States of America who vote for the position that people have in politics rather than the person. And that disturbs me a lot. I am really disturbed by that, because you could converse with somebody on the basis of religious beliefs and try to have a debate, try to have a discussion. But when it's already a foregone conclusion that policy is character, that's what we're going to vote for, it's really difficult to open the conversation. and have a debate and try to have people see your point of view. And I would also say that the potential is there because no community is like a homogenized version of people with just a certain belief. In my community, when I went to raise money for the Joint Office for Homeless Services to buy, tents and tarps for the people in Portland, there were people who didn't want homeless people around their business because it's bad. So they're against homelessness, but they're not against homeless. And I can somehow get through to them to talk about that. But um, I hope, I did listen to Lisa's lectures online, and there's all the good stuff in that. But the problem is, how do you convince people who already believe policy is character to say, no, character is higher than policy? So hopefully some of you learned people can tell me how to break that barrier.
We got a lot of smart people around this Zoom call, so I'm sure somebody wants to dive into that. GURPREET. Thank you.
From the Buddhist perspective, what divides us is not our mind. Our mind creates the world, and our mind creates the people and things around us. And one of the wrong views we talk about in Buddhist Sangha or Buddhist communities that extreme views. Because everybody or people have extreme views of, either side, they have arguments, conflicts, fighting, and violence happens. So the Buddhist principle is to leave these extreme views and take the middle path. But taking the middle path doesn't mean that we don't pay any attention to the issues we are facing right now. That is, middle path means to respect each other's opinions. And I think what I feel as Buddhist is that this is the mind we are lacking in United States, respecting each other's opinions and respecting each other's tradition and cultures. So this is what I feel right now, and I hope this was something helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
My brother, Reverend Yuki, I didn't realize how Buddhist I am as a Baptist, but I appreciate what you're saying. I think that as we approach this question, number one, none of us reside in a culture that is monolithic. For every one of us, there are a number of different opinions, different ideas, and different approaches to various things. Our beliefs are strong, our convictions are strong, but to the heart of the question, when it asks the question, I think it's a great question, Michael, and I thank you for it. Can we create a just peace and unity? I think the answer, quite frankly, is yes. To me, the question is really, will we? From my perspective, there's a big issue about intentionality, because to some degree, there are some who don't want to create a peace and a unity and don't want to reach across the divide to their brother or sister. They're pretty happy in the silo they're in. And I think that's been our problem. And I think, quite frankly, as a country, that what we're beginning to see is how that begins to really fray us at the seams, that we begin to make decisions about each other because of whether we have a mask or we don't, or we're driving a truck with a flag on it or we don't, or we're, outright Republican or Democrat or independent or anything like that. And these really create the silos of who we are. And then we begin to use them as data points to determine who's going to be a person I'm going to, be with, or or to have conversation with or to argue with or anything else, when the reality is, from my perspective, I like peace. I happen to be a person who believes in the great work that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was trying to do, the great work of Mahatma Gandhi and many, many others along the way. And that is, how do we find a way to actually have peace with one another, work with one another, respect each other's traditions, and by the way, get close enough, like Brian Stevenson says in his book, Just Mercy, to be proximate and to recognize that being proximate means it also gives you an opportunity to change the narrative. Because quite frankly, oftentimes we have views about each other that are as ignorant as they can be, because we've really never spent any time to try to really get close to one another to understand each other. And that lack of understanding really hurts us, because honestly, the next piece of what he says is be ready to be uncomfortable. Because oftentimes people just don't want to be uncomfortable. I want to be comfortable. I want to do this. I want to do that. And then finally he says to, remember that we should always have hope. And so I end my comment here, going back to my friend, Dr. McKinley, when he said, what are we taught? What does Jesus tell us? And in the way that he grabs that very important question out of I'll put it that way, into a theological answer that says that the person that's my neighbor, that I love and I care for, is the person that was on that dangerous road, that even when his brothers walked away from them, or her brothers walked away from them, the one who came to rescue me did not know me at all. The one who came to rescue me saw not only was I in danger, or that person in danger, but that person felt a sense of responsibility that if I don't stop to help them, what will happen to them? And then went to the extreme of making sure they were taken care of, and saying to the inn owner, if the charges become more than this person can pay, I will come back through here and I'm going to pay it anyway. So I don't want that person to be charged. Can we do it? The answer is yes. Will we do it? That to me is really the classic, will we? And I know as members of the Common Table, you've got a bunch of us, certainly 9 of us, who would say, yes, we will. That's exactly what we're going to do.
Thank you, Pastor Matt. I appreciate that. After each one of you speaks, I have like 10 questions that I think are so clever and pithy, but it'll take us into all these directions. So anyone else want to pick up after what Pastor Hennessy or anyone else has shared so far?
The one thing that comes to mind for me is, after hearing, and I really appreciate this discussion, is Lisa herself, Dr. Jones herself indicated she goes back to the beginning. She goes back to the beginning in her sharing of her work. And back to the beginning means going back to the genesis of made in the image and likeness of God. And she repeats that, and that's one of the things I find and I'm very drawn to. And I think the key element there is likeness of God, not God. None of us is God. And God created this universe in the image and likeness so that we might learn how to be together, how to work together, how to dialogue together, how do we connect together in all of our faith traditions that we are engaged in. And when we start to think about the circular approach to the present time, and we think about the beginning, and we go through all of the ways in which we all came together over the centuries, I think that we are primed for a continuing testament. We are primed right now for a continuing testimony of what does that mean to all be the same family in the likeness, and not create an environment where someone is actually claiming to be God. I think that's the part that really is distracting and problematic. And so part of that conversation that we have together here at the common table, but also in every place that we are, is what does that mean? And I would agree that unity may not be the word, but it's peace with justice. It's how do we come together in a way that acknowledges our role in the family, our role in this universe, and our responsibility to one another. So maybe it isn't unity, maybe it's generosity, maybe it's grace. Maybe that's where we need to be thinking about how we move forward, because we are, again, like I say, primed, practically speaking, at least in this country, for a discussion around what it means to be people of faith, of all traditions, and how do we come together in ways that are not only generous, but also receiving of the perspective of another. In what I know is clear of all of those who came before us around just peace, what it really means is nonviolence. Nonviolence. So those would be my thoughts at this point.
I appreciate it. It's wonderful, and I can't help myself, Linda. So I want to sharpen our conversation by bringing back what Reverend Tara had said earlier. Because, I mean, I agree with everything that's being said here, and I wonder, will we do it? How do we do it? When people, like right now, there's a lot of differences around this Zoom call. And I know you all well enough. I know what would kind of blow us into different kinds of conversations. But Reverend Tara asks an important question. How do we even, whether it's unity or whether it's just friendship, or how do we get there when so many people won't even come to a table like this, where they won't acknowledge whether it's Reverend Tara's identity as a queer woman, or Pastor Hennessy's as an African-American man, or MANIJEH as a Muslim? How do we start to use our faith traditions and our community leadership to form these connections when it feels like, for a lot of people, not just out there in the public sphere, but inside our communities of faith, inside each of your communities of faith, won't even come to the table on some of these issues? I know one of you who hasn't had a chance to speak yet has a great answer to that. Oh, Rabbi David, okay.
I don't know whether I have a great answer, but I'll take a stab at it. And I just want to begin with a movie I loved as a kid, which was Star Wars. And, you know, what is Star Wars about? Star Wars says that the world and our lives is a battle of goodness versus evil, of dark versus light, and that the only way to succeed is to battle against it. And I think that sort of storyline serves us and bolsters our identity by privileging us with a sense of righteousness. There's a problem with that, though, and that part of, I think, how we move past that is stepping away from that frame into a universe of moral ambiguity. And one of the blessings, certainly, of my tradition is its capacity for being multivocal. And in our sacred scriptures, in the Talmud and the oral law, we have recorded not only the winning opinions, but also those whose ideas were vanquished in that discussion. And so there is an openness to entertaining different perspectives. And let's be honest, the sages themselves understood that this was not a panacea, and that we have examples of that multivocal process going awry, and of people using what power they had to detract. So there's some Jewish categories that try to deal with this. What I want to do is share a little bit of science that in Judaism we take all knowledge in, and we then reconnect it with our apperception with these different notions. So there was an experiment in 1951 with Dartmouth students and Princeton students after the 1951 Dartmouth-Princeton football game, which turned very violent. And they showed clips to the Dartmouth students and Princeton students, the exact same clip. And unsurprisingly, the Dartmouth students counted the same number of infractions by both teams, which is what led to the violence. But the Dartmouth infractions were all very minor and inconsequential, and the Princeton infractions were all severe. The Princeton students, meanwhile, didn't do quite as well as Dartmouth in entertaining the potential righteousness of their adversaries on the field. They saw a far greater number of infractions occurring by Dartmouth. What's interesting is that this experiment was redone in 2006 using brain scanners and some other tools. And what we discovered was not just the normal forms of bias, but that each team and each people were literally, physiologically seeing different things. It wasn't that they were seeing the same thing and pushing aside some of it because of bias. Their brains literally saw reality differently. And I think that what I'm asking for, thinking, and it's a hard ask, but it's one that leadership perhaps can do, is that we are so aware of subjectivity and the illusion of confidence, halo devil effect, ambiguity intolerance, and this sort of goes back to something I think Rick said, right? When we are in an ambiguous situation, it creates anxiety, and in order to get rid of it, we'll come to a conclusion. So I think we know enough about how the brain works that we ought to realize that the people we see as denying something fundamental actually literally are seeing the world differently, and that we have to sort of check our own processing again and again. And I know that for me, what I try to do as my process is whenever I have a strongly held opinion about something, I try to come up with at least 3 to 5 reasons why I am wrong. And then, normally, because there's some bias, I'll come up with the 10 reasons why I'm right. But that there's a process by which I take that my assumptions, no matter how good they are, must be challenged. And that I am not seeing reality in its wholeness. I can only get a thin slice that comes through my filters. And so our job, right, with the proximate nature of connection that Pastor Hennessy talked about, there are ways that we can get beyond that. And indeed, we know that there's groupthink, and that when we step out into other groups, it actually changes what we decide unconsciously and unawares. So there's a lot that science can teach us to help us put into place our religious values, which otherwise have this way of being beautiful lip service, but don't actually advance us. So those are sort of my thoughts about a difficult path to get us towards unity by helping us to realize how we think, and also therefore how others think, and that very often we each are imagining that we're Luke Skywalker and that the other side is Darth Vader.
Excellent. I appreciate you reframing that in science fiction terms that I can understand and relate to. But MANIJEH or Randy, would you like to pick up on any of this?
Thank you so much. Okay, coming from a kind of Islamic background and also coming from Iran, it's my views. I see how similar I think, like all of you guys, and I am honored to say, okay, I consider myself a little bit wise, because all of you wise people saying things that I think also, and the point is, my Islamic teaching I learned that, okay, we are either we are brothers and sisters either in creation or in faith. And then I thought in like one of the verses of the chapters of Quran, the 49, which is called Chambers, in Arabic Hujarat, and the verse number 13, God tells us, "O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you nations and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of God," which in Islam we say Allah, "is the most righteous of you. Indeed, Allah is all-knowing and all-aware." So these are the teachings that I have been raised with. And I always said, okay, Islam teaches me I never attack people. I should always defend myself if I'm attacked. But then I came to the States, and from the very beginning, I started working at this kind of small store. And I noticed that people are coming and stealing. So one time I told this lady who happened to be white from the United States, and I said, do you know what you're doing? You are stealing. And she said, here is America. I said, okay, what does that mean? So, and one time even a group of kind of people, they attacked. I was by myself over there, and they attacked me. They hit me from my back, and they put some kind of knife or something by my neck. And I told them, just go ahead and take whatever you want. Just don't hurt me, because I'm not fighting you guys. Just do it. So when I see these things, I'm saying, okay, I have to be more prepared. I believe all that. I believe that we are but, or like for recently, one of my friends, she has been attacked because she is wearing coverage, a veil, downtown Portland. This white guy kind of made her fall on her face and then started hitting her with sticks and all that. And then authorities came and all that and saved her. But now she's even scared to leave her home. She has been living in downtown for 40 years now. And so when I see these things, I'm saying I'm not becoming hopeless, because I believe with organizing and uniting, no matter how much the number of those people who are kind of fighting and ones are for violence, no matter how much their number is, I still believe the number of people who are against violence is more. That's the hope I get, and that's makes me hopeful. That's how I wake up every day praying for the people who don't want to even reconcile, even they don't want even to look. Okay, we have differences. Let's celebrate our differences. Let's learn from our differences, because we weren't supposed to be like each other the whole time in the whole universe. We are born differently intentionally, and that was for learning from each other. And and unfortunately, evil powers are there. Like, for example, the authorities, the power is in the hand of evil, and they make a speech and make people kind of say, okay, now we have to go and fight for rights. They don't know that all these things, they call them rights, it's privileges. They are not right. The only right thing that you have to do is the control that you have over your actions. And so that's how I believe. And then I believe in the power of praying. And all these differences comes when the religion comes to kind of comes in the equation, sometimes makes it even worse, because sometimes religion doesn't come with wisdom. Like, people blindly follow some preachers, and then if preachers tell them the wrong thing, they don't even want to see other than that. Like, for example, I have friends who I love them so much. They are Christians. They come to me and look into my eyes, say, we feel sorry for you because you will go to hell because you don't believe in Jesus. They don't know that I believe in Jesus. I love Jesus, because we have lots of places in our Holy Quran talking about Jesus, and you all know about it. And we have a whole chapter about Virgin Mary in our Holy Quran. But the way I feel about Jesus, I believe that he is a prophet, and he is a wonderful gentleman who had the he was valued enough to be chosen by God to be a prophet. And like Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, like and Abraham, like Noah, all these prophets. And God sends all these prophets to us for only one reason, to show us that there is only one God, and that God blew in us from his soul. And so we should respect each other because we have God in ourselves. And so I am hopeful. I am grateful for wonderful people who are fighting for justice. And I'm sure we will finally win, because we believe in the upper power, and we believe that so many of these dynasties have been fallen down because they were wrong, and righteous always will open. It's like sunshine. We cannot hide the sunshine, no matter how much power you have, how much money you have. People of power, power of people will win. And I believe that, and I'm hopeful for that.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate the way you frame all of it. And to all of you, I suspect, given the flow of the conversation, though, that there's a very different way of framing this from the perspective of our Indigenous wisdom. So I know Randy Woodley is chomping at the bit to share more. But Randy, share with us, what are we missing here?
Yeah, I'm not quite chomping at the bit. I don't want to embarrass myself in front of such esteemed colleagues. So I was just sort of like waiting. But to respond to what Tara had mentioned about, when they won't even recognize your own humanity. In Native America, we have a lot of stories and a lot of strategies for peacemaking, and they are costly and they take time. But that's why there's strategies, because, if you're going to really work on lasting peace, you have to work on that for a while. I think some of it boils down to this, that somebody has to go to the other camp, and risk being vulnerable. In our belief, our humanness, our vulnerability is our most spiritual, is our greatest spirituality. And yes, there are always going to be people who co-opt God for their violence and for their righteous self-righteousness, or whatever, their utopian vision of America. And and I actually think that this civil religion, this American myth, if you will, is probably the deepest and most widely held religion. And despite all of the religions that we represent, even a lot of our people, I'm sure, also hold that even more dear. And so, we have these different sides who have a utopian vision of what America is supposed to be. And I think that in and of itself is a problem, is this idea of utopianism, rather than accepting something less than what we want, and perhaps that we can all agree upon. And since I'm coming from my music studio right now, I think I'll end with a quote from an ancient wisdom keeper who said, you can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you just might find you get what you need. And I think a lot of times Mick Jagger's words are sort of what we have to settle for. We just can't all get what we want every time, but let's just, make room so that we all get what we need.
Amen to that. Thank you, Randy. And thanks to all of you. I know how it is when we're on these panels, and we need to do these more often. We need to spend more time on different questions, because I think people are really hungry for these conversations. But I know that that you have more to share. So does anyone, we've had some time to listen to each other and hear from each other, and we're warmed up. Are there other pieces that people want to share into this space? Like I said, we're going long, and I'm going to let us go for a little while, but we can always edit things out, but is there something you're just itching to share that you didn't get a chance to the first time around?
Yeah, I'm really bad at this, but you know, I kind of think after I say things. And so one of the things I should have said was that about this humanness is that when we recognize the humanity in someone else, we can no longer make up the kinds of names and words and stories and things about them. And so this is why it's so important that there be people who make themselves vulnerable, who go to the other side, and who, even though it might not pay off, it still behooves us to try, because peace, especially in a time of war, and you know, we're not quite there yet. Peace is in and of itself a worthy goal, and so, you know, let's do our best.
Thanks, Randy. MANIJEH, you're the only, I can't see everyone's. I can see MANIJEH's face, so go ahead and jump in. If you waved your hand and I didn't see it, my apologies.
If I may, I wanted to share this poem by Rumi. I don't know if you're familiar with him. It's about, he's all about love, and I love him because gently, gently open your eyes and look at the face of love. Gaze at her intoxicity eyes. Let her smiling face lure your heart into her infinite garden. Taste the sweetness of her fruit, drink the scent of her roses, and dance swaying like a willow in the wind. Forsake worldly pleasures for the deeper fulfillment of the infinite mystery of love. And that's what I believe, that the whole world is summarized in love. And I'm sure that we have the power of God, and according to me, Allah is always with us. And I believe that God loves all his creatures, all his creations. So even people who are for violence, God loves them. And because of that, I just pray that they find the guidance to righteousness, and just come to the table and believe that with all our differences, we have lots of similarities. And we have to get to that point that, remember, this is the old philosophy, divide and conquer. That's how we are being divided, because so many people are taking advantage of those differences. If we just come to the point, we regular people fight each other, don't know what they're gaining, why we are kind of busy fighting each other. And so if we can come to that recognition, like for example, people say we want this guy, we want that guy, we have to see what is in it at the end for us. At night when we want to sleep, most of us don't have a place to sleep. We don't have food on our tables. But those people who make us fight, they have everything. And we happen to help them get that. So I hope we come to that realization that at the end, we common people, regular people, should be brothers and sisters and fight against those superpowers and those powers.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, thank you for that.
One thing, oh, I'm sorry.
No, jump into it. You were the brave one to start us. I was going to see if you wanted to add something.
Well, one thing that I think of, as Tara and others have mentioned, the anger and the hostility. And I think one of the great tragedies right now is the white evangelical church, that in so many ways has been co-opted by the Republican Party to a point where I'm not, like, evangelicalism in its roots was about a belief in the the Christian Bible and preaching the gospel. I don't think anybody thinks of it as that anymore. And aligning themselves with that power and demonizing everybody else based on, abortion and traditional marriage really has vandalized any sense of Christian witness because of that. And so the fear that I think that people are sharing is very real, particularly when they co-opt Jesus to justify their violence or their anger or their hatred. And so what we have right now is this almost new religion called evangelicalism that is actually a nationalism with kind of a Gnostic God on top of it that they call Jesus. And unfortunately, that the only way that that's going to turn is if the white evangelical church comes to a place of repentance, owning the history, the violence in this country, the racism, until there is kind of a reckoning, I think, with that own sense of the church that is claiming the God of the Christian Bible, that builds walls and sets fires. There has to be ownership that is a sin against the very God that they claim. And so when as everyone has shared about male and female and God created in his likeness, the truth is we are becoming less human in our society. And when we become less human, we become much more animalistic in that sense, territorial and violent and really capable of horrible things, as we have seen. And one of the beautiful lessons that I learned from Reverend Leroy Haynes, who was a dynamic part of the civil rights movement, is the ability to love the perpetrator, to see even in this sort of vandalized image of God, the spark of that Imago Dei, that image that was still in this person, even as they were beating him, as he was standing up for the rights of African Americans. That agape love is what Reverend Leroy Haynes calls it. What would it mean to risk at such a level as we watch during the civil rights movement, such risk in sacrificial love that was experienced, right? And to not have hate after being beaten by someone, like that comes from another world. That kind of love, that's the kingdom of God breaking in on earth. And so those are kind of my thoughts. The need for the church, the white evangelical church, to own that sin, our sin, and then secondly to have the kind of, like, to follow the leadership of the marginalized and people of color who have been in this place of exile and on the margins and loved so well and brought such revolution. I really think it's time for the white church to shut up and listen and learn from our brothers and sisters of color.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that a little bit, Pastor Rick. I think you raised a really good point about, reckoning with the sins of our traditions and the ways that sometimes they have contributed to the oppression in society that many of us experience. And I think that for the white church that doesn't necessarily identify as evangelical, that we have been silent. Our sin is omission in many ways, of not being as vocal in terms of lifting up and calling out people that are using Jesus in a way that is not godlike. And Rabbi David, you bring up a really great point about more than one reality, because I think that we do live in different realities. And the challenge that many religious people have in the white community is that our silo, our ivory tower, protects us from experiencing those other realities. So whether it's a houseless person who's under a blue tarp downtown, or whether it's a person of color who gets beaten by the police or harassed by the police for walking down the street, or is held to a different standard than white people, we don't actually see and experience those realities as often as we need to. And so it's easy for us to hide in those towers and to not really understand what's happening. Our traditions teach us that there is that element of God in each of us, and that we've been trained to listen deeply to each other, but it's very hard to do that in the public sphere right now. And so, you know, I think that there are multiple layers of things that we can do. Some of it is what we're trying to accomplish with Common Table, where we say that the priority of being in relationship is more important than our individual theological or social differences. But out on the street, where people are dying every day, where people don't have enough to eat, where the police are acting aggressively or not protecting every single day, I don't feel like I have patience and time to not speak out, to make my cup of tea and sit down with you, that we have to speak out for justice, because there's suffering that is happening. And we are complicit in that suffering if we don't act urgently to stop it. So whether it's to call out the role of protesting, and I know that that could take us down another whole road here in terms of we might have different perspectives about that. But the one thing that that I believe to be true about the protesting that's been happening in Portland is it's working insofar as it's helping us to have conversations that we would not have had if that wasn't still going on. And the urgency is coming because people are dying. And so I think that our challenge is that it's going to take a long period of time to build the relationships that we're talking about. But in the meantime, I think that we have to put forward a call that says our common humanity matters more than our theological difference, than what political party we vote in, for how we choose to solve fiscal problems, that our humanity has to matter. And right now, the reality of many people in our society is their humanity does not matter to society. And so there's an urgency that I'm unapologetic for, because I've seen it in my own community and the LGBT community. Right now, trans people of color are being killed, murdered at an extraordinary rate. That's not okay. And, you know, they're doing sweeps in Portland as we speak for our community members that are living around the parks. The police are making them move. Where are they supposed to go? You know, we don't want to deal with issues around sanitation in the bathroom and trash, but what are they supposed to do? So, you know, I'm not interested in a think tank where we sit around and kick around ideas about how to do this while our people every day are suffering. So I think that the value of Common Table has been to lift up a model for how we can lead with the belief in our common humanity, recognizing that we don't agree on everything, and that's painful. I mean, I've been in our gatherings of 30 or 40, however many we are, and make that reality not seem like it's true because of what we're doing, but it is true. And so I think that we're modeling something here that even in the midst of that pain, even in the midst of maybe we don't understand each other's reality, which is probably true, we're choosing to be in relationship. And so I think it's kind of a both and. I think that we have to be engaged in projects like this where we have a deep commitment, and perhaps out of this relational commitment, we can be effective in easing the suffering that's going on. And at the same time, we have to find a way to put some of that aside because our people are suffering.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Tara. I think that one of the things that happened when I first gathered you all, or was first having these conversations, is I would really start with the pitch. I do not want you to leave your work behind. I don't want you to leave what matters to you most behind. And for the most part, we've done that. But it's a hard circle to draw. There are folks missing from these conversations that I would very much love to have here. This is the tension of our times. How do we represent what is most important to us? And then how do we extend past those barriers to really transform? And I mean, it's a work in progress. I have so many things. Tara and I get to meet for lunch often, so we can go together, but I want to make sure I'm leaving space for others who have more they want to share. Randy, I see your face or your hand in the screen. I can't see everything where I am, but I can see that.
Rabbi Kozak's after him, and then me, if you will.
Okay, yeah, keep going. Yeah, on stack.
All right.
So I see you must have a touch of evangelicalism in you, Michael, because you said, I see that hand.
I was raised very much in the evangelical Baptist tradition.
Yeah. So one of the things that our tradition teaches us, and believe me, these are serious matters, and we have had serious issues for over 400 years with attempted genocide and ethnocide, and we live with tragedy every day as a result of the post-generation trauma and everything else that occurs as a result of these things. So it's not like I'm being Pollyanna-ish, but one of our greatest tools as Indigenous people is to remember that part of being human is to have humor. And we are able then to laugh at ourselves and laugh at each other and laugh with each other. All of it goes lots of different ways to get us through these tough times, and to realize that we need to be reminded that we are just human beings. We are not God. We are not great mystery. We're not creator. We are put here to be human beings. And so part of that is to remember that. And we have lots of stories, but in honor of our new friend, I wanted to read a Sufi poem that's one of my favorites. And it helps us to remember our humanness as well. And excuse me, it's not quite politically correct for these days, but I'm just going to read it as it was written. And Hafiz wrote, God and I have become like two giant fat people living in a tiny boat. We keep bumping into each other and laughing.
That's great. Thank you so much, Randy. Apparently Rabbi Kozak has had his hand up for a second and I missed it. Rabbi?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just still thinking of that image of the boat. I won't get that out of my head very quickly, Randy. Thank you. So first of all, I just want to say and follow up on something that Rick said, that part of the process and is that that effort of cleaning our own house first, of looking inward, and that too often I think we want to look at what's going wrong, and the place where we have the greatest control is sort of by looking at ourselves as individuals, and then our communities as well, in relationship, to what we can do. Sarah, I was very moved by your insistence. It's not the first time hearing it, right? That when there is injustice in front of you, right, you do need to take action. And my complication around that, I've been thinking recently a lot about the Treaty of Versailles. And if you remember, right, Germany started World War I. And when they were defeated, the Treaty of Versailles was put into place by the aggrieved parties who were the victims of German aggression. And they had a right to sort of sue for peace in the way they did. But the way they did it, most historians believe, sowed the conditions for World War II and for the societal breakdown in Germany that resulted in the death of 6 million of my people, millions of gays and lesbians and Roma, the gypsies, and so many other minorities. And so there is an issue or challenge that I struggle with in relationship to the tactics. That very often, while we have to respond to injustice in front of us, it seems that so often the way we do so or the way we speak about it actually sows the conditions for, because look, with that Rumi poem of love or Randy's the Hafiz poem, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And in the world of spirit and in the world of mysticism where everything is one, that's almost unavoidable. And so how do we go about, on the one hand, alleviating the suffering that's in front of us, and at the same time do it in a way that doesn't create this whole cycle of unanticipated consequences, which too often in history produces the very opposite result of what the justice fighters are laboring for. And I wish I had a better answer to that, but I know it's a real dilemma and challenge that has to be worked through if we're going to do better than previous eras. And so I think part of it, that looking inward, sort of seeing where our faults are, can maybe reduce some of the triumphalism or self-congratulatory space that we like to occupy when we see injustice and are laboring against it. So I'd love to hear some responses or thoughts about that particular dilemma, because it's one that that occupies me, and that I see the dilemma clearly, but not always the way out of that.
As you are all talking to each other, I'm already writing the agenda for the next Common Table retreat for where we need like all night on a lot of this stuff. But I want to honor that. I think it was Matt and then Linda who had their hands up. And if I had that order wrong, I know you'll both correct me.
I yield to my co-chair.
Absolutely, you were first, so you go right ahead. I'll follow you.
First of all, this has been a rich conversation, and it reminds me again of the very rich and important weapon that, I shouldn't say weapon, but at least tool, whatever you want to call it, that we all have as faith people, and that's the power of prayer. Every one of us gets on our knees, or drives in our car, sits in our chair, or sits in a pew, or in the bema, or in the pulpit, and we are praying. We believe, and we tell our people all the time, I'm going to pray for you, or let me pray for you right now. And to me, part of the answer to this question is the importance for all of us through all of our traditions is to make it a priority to pray. Because if this is really what we want to see happen, and we really believe that God has the power to make it happen, because we don't on our own, we've already shown that we really do need to really forcibly push ourselves to make this an issue of prayer and fasting and things of that nature, to say I want it that bad. When I think about my sister, Reverend Tara, who mentioned about people respecting her humanity and how it feels, the hurt she feels, even when she sits in a meeting with us at Common Table, and people who will not look her in the eyes. And I just have to remind you, my people have been dealing with that for ever since we were forced to come here. And the fact of the matter is that is still as real today as it has been throughout history. And the reality is that we knew that the important thing for us, and I still say this today, is that somebody else's love for me has absolutely nothing to do with my love for them. I'm going to love them anyway. That's all there is to it. I've said that in this church for 15 years. That's where I'm at. You don't love me, it's okay. I'm going to keep on loving you. If you don't want to look at me, it's okay. I'm going to keep on looking at you. When I hear my brother talk about Pastor Haynes and a reality of his days in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the importance of really how true agape came to be, in part because they had no choice. As a person who sat with Coretta King and got to listen to her for 20 years about the movement, of which I was a generation and a half later for me, I just recognize that my mothers and fathers who came before me were prepared by God to have a patience and a love that honestly in the 21st century, you don't see a lot of, because we don't tolerate near as much as they tolerated. And yet, I think our charge is that for us, if we're serious about wanting to make change, we've got to be at this every day. It's got to be central to our being. The other day, as most of you perhaps have this in your church, we've got an amalgam of different people that are here and different political persuasions as well. And the other day, one of my members, she and her husband are African American, but they are staunch Trump supporters. And not to get into a long conversation, but I just said, and she said to me, I know you don't like him. I said, let me be clear about something. It has nothing to do about whether I like him or not. There has something to do with what leadership looks like. I said, and from my perspective, what I've heard come out of his mouth, I said, I want to put you're a mother of a 9-year-old and a 16-year-old. I said, there are things that have come out of his mouth. You're going to tell me that if your child came home from school and the teacher said, this is what your daughter said, this is what your other daughter said, that you would say that's okay. I said, because see, I wasn't raised that way. I was raised to be decent to everybody. I was raised that words that are used that are hurtful, that are not words that you use at all. And that being in a place and being in leadership requires you to be and have a broader view than your own. And that quite frankly, as a leader, it requires you to not think so much about yourself, but think about others and think about the whole. And I think today for us to be successful at this, it requires us to do the same thing. Think about the bigger picture of what we're trying to achieve. And the fact is, it's not even for us to see the fruit of it all, because we may not. Just like Dr. King said, I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over and I may not get there with you, but it did not stop. Even though in less than 24 hours, he had been assassinated, his hope was to keep on working, even if he did not see the fruition of the great work that he had done. And so I just say today, remind all of us, let's just keep on doing the great work that must be done. And when others fall by the wayside, pick them up. And when others want to be cynical, tell them we're not going to be, and remind them they don't have a right to be either, but that we're all in this together. And all you need to do for me, Tara, is nudge me when somebody's not paying attention when you're speaking, because I'm going to go talk to my brother or sister and get them straight. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Pastor. I want to hand it over to Reverend Linda.
After I heard everyone just speak just about the last 5 minutes, it has, it just always influences what I might say. It continually influences what I might say. And the thing that is coming to my heart at this moment is the reality of our circumstances are really based in the human condition. Yes, we are in likeness of God. However, the human condition that we have actually allowed ourselves to create, and we are in charge of it, the human condition has hardened our hearts. And it's really difficult when you talk about medicine and medical practice and all of that, is that the one place we don't go often enough to, in my opinion, is to the place of our soul. Because we can't see it. It can't be operated on. We can't actually see it in an x-ray. You don't see it in a CT scan, but it's really there. It's really the connection to our spirit. And when I think about that, I think about how that spirit and that soul must become alive and healed and well for us to actually be doing the work we need to do to transform our human condition to one of generosity, to one of public ethics. And so I think about it a lot, and the thing that comes to me, and we come from our own traditions, and I gather that and I know it, but I will say to you, as a Latina in this country, we hear all kinds of things in the media about how we all look alike, vote alike, say alike, all that. But I will claim to you, we're not a monolith. And we actually need to acknowledge our distinction and not our extinction. Our distinction as a people and our reality as a people. So when I think about that, the thing that comes to mind that we do have in common is our language. Our language amongst ourselves, maybe it has different waves and different words that come through it, but the one word I will claim, and some of you have heard me say this, is the encuentro of the soul, the encuentro of the human spirit is the encounter. But the word encuentro is not a translation of encounter. I will tell you, it comes from the very root of our reality. The encuentro is when we're together, can listen to one another, we respectfully have that ethic among us, and where we say to each other, I am because you are, the Ubuntu. The encuentro for us is when we are so close together in many ways, call it spirit, call it soul, call it what we will, that we cannot ignore the existence of the other. And the existence of the other means that we listen well, we give ourselves to that space that we're in, and before you know it, that encuentro finds a flutter. My friend Hector Lopez calls it the flutter of the butterfly wings, that says you cannot tell the difference, you cannot tell where I end and you begin, Michael. We cannot tell our separation in that way. And I will claim to you a very specific example. We have many of those examples when we've had experiences, and many of us will say, I have to say that meeting you changed my life. We've heard that. Or an encounter with you, or an encuentro with you really transformed my thinking. That kind of thing. Well, let me give you an example of what has caused me to have a hardened heart. And I'm sure many of us, is that the reality of children in cages has really brought us to our knees. The reality of children in cages that have been, frankly, this has been going on for decades, friends. But the reality of that has actually softened our hearts. It has actually brought to life how the injustice of our work together and how the injustice of our public ethic has been violated, and the very soul of the nation is at risk because we cannot, will not, should not ever have an encuentro with a child and then abandon them. So that's a part of the reality in my example that I share, because it in fact is breaking our hearts. It's breaking our hearts. And that said, I think that where we're moving and where we have to move, and unfortunately, we have gotten to a place, and basically we've had to recognize each other. There is no choice about it. And I want to just also quote something that Lisa Sharon Harper said in the film I just saw today, is saying no to injustice. And this is her quote: saying no to injustice is the first day of the last days of a unjust structure. Saying no, saying ya no mas, ya basta. Let's go together. Let's have conversation and come to really healing our souls and softening our hearts. And if we don't do that, we are part of the human condition that we have created, that we are so troubled by and at risk at this moment in our time.
Thank you, Reverend Linda. I appreciate that. I feel like we could go and go. There's all these threads that are already emerging, but I want to check in with GURPREET and YUKI. Is there anything you'd like to share to this wider conversation? I know we're going to have to wrap at some point, but I want to hear from you.
I do want to add something. To me, it seems like the whole life journey is all about, starts from the seed of self, and then it develops into just self-preservation. And for many, many people, I think for vast humanity, it just stays in that self-preservation. You could be Jeff Bezos with billions and billions of dollars and want to hold on to them because that's part of the self. Or you could be a homeless, worried about where the next meal is coming from, what's going to hold the roof on the head. And all the messiahs and the prophets, their whole teaching was to bring us to the self-realization. So it is just, when I look at the example from my fifth guru, the fifth Sikh guru was the first one to be martyred by the Mughal dynasty because he spoke something that did not fit the narrative of the ruler. So he was tortured, and his son becomes the sixth guru, and his grandson was the seventh guru. So in the meantime, one of the ruling dynasties' cherished prince had fallen sick and couldn't be cured. And the seventh guru's dispensary happened to have these medications that could work. So he sent the medication with his blessing, and the medication cured the prince. And then people came to the seventh guru and said, isn't this the same family that tortured and killed your great-great-grandfather and has caused so much turmoil among our people? You know, we're hunted like wild prey, and yet you are sending the medication with your blessing. So the seventh guru said, if you look at the sandalwood tree, it gives its fragrance indiscriminately to everybody. You could go there with an axe and chop it, and you would still get the fragrance, or you would fashion it into an incense stick, and you would go and pray with devotion before your idol, before your guru, and that it becomes act of devotion. So it's basically, it was like your compassion is at your own command. You choose who you're going to give it to. So same thing when I sit and think about how troubled I am about the history of our nation and how much, you know, the racism, all the xenophobia that was always there, it hasn't been created, it has been centered, it has been validated in these last 4 years more than ever before. So I find that while I am not the agent of the world peace, I am not an agent to address the world hunger and eliminate it, I could do something in my own authenticity. I could see the humanity in Donald Trump as much as I could see the humanity among all my wonderful brothers and sisters here. So it's really hard to honor that. But to conclude, I'm going to come towards being an occupational therapist. We look at a patient and we always come up with short-term goals and long-term goals. I'm not going to try to do something, but in addressing to make sure that we can honor everybody's humanity and honor the pain and suffering that has gone on and try to alleviate that, I'm going to start with a small step. In our neighborhood, there's a neighborhood website where it just talks about the history of this area being the white settlers who came and settled. It wasn't settled by them. My brother Randy and his people and other people were here way before that, and they did a lot to bring about how Oregon is. So I think a small step that I'm going to take is reach out with all the research about the broken treaties and ask them to please include this history on the website as well. And going forward, I'm in my own community. The Sikhs are supposed to be the people who honor Ikuankar, one divine manifestation. But in my community, I see people who are staunch conservatives, and they do buy into the narrative that is promoted with the fear and division at the basis of it. So trying to talk to them and trying. So I see that I am going into being the agent of change persona, but on a small scale. I'm just saying at our dinner tables, at our cafeteria tables, in our office lunches, these conversations can be started on a small scale. And hopefully, we may not really change the whole narrative, but at least in our social realm, we could make a tiny difference. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you for that, Gurpreet. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
So maybe this is off topic, but you know who Phil Jackson is, the head coach, NBA head coach. He was coaching Chicago Bulls and LA Lakers and so on. When he was in Chicago, I heard he attended services of our sister temples in Chicago. And he got a Buddhist idea from, the services and incorporated that idea into his teaching method. And one of the saying I like from Phil Jackson, he said, good teams become great ones when the members trust each other enough to surrender the me for the we. And this is one of the idea of Buddhism too. We focus on me all the time, but we need to look outside of ourselves, and we have to, focus on we aspect. And I use my hand. I don't know if you can see. This is M, but we are focusing on this side. What we need is to turn our idea into W, from M to W, and that's whole thing about Buddhism too, turning our idea from self-centered idea to compassion to the others, right? So I just wanted to share this idea. Maybe you can use this hand movement. When you see McDonald's signs, maybe you have kind of thinking you want to change into W. But
Friends, we've only scratched the surface of this discussion, and I know there's so much more we can dive into. So I'm going to encourage us to hold on to the whole of this video for our website, and I look forward to the time that each of us get to spend together in community going forward. It's a pleasure to know and work with each of you, and I just, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate the time you've taken today for us to gather.